All right, welcome back, guys. We are back, and really glad to be here. So, again, this is the second time we've done this, office hours. The first one went extremely well. It's very successful. We got people in here. We got 6 different people in here. We lasted a total of, 3 hours. It was the longest live stream I'd ever done. So if you're new here, I've been doing live streams for a few months now, but this is the second one of this kind. And if you're finding me, this is how it goes. You come on, and we just talk about whatever you want to talk about within the realms of philosophy. Let's not get crazy, of course. The idea here is to work out a problem or something. And again, it's not adversarial in nature. It's not, the idea is not that we're going to debate and fight about this or anything like that. The idea is to, I view philosophy as a collaborative, cooperative endeavor. And I think philosophy is best done in conversation with others. So that's the idea here. So if you have any ideas that you have been working on, even if it's not now, you don't have to come on now if you're like too shy or if you're like still working through an idea or something like that. But again, this is not to make anybody look like an idiot. If anything, I'm going to be the one who looks like an idiot because I may not know everything. So this is not just a call-in show so that so you can be owned by me or something. That's not the idea at all. The idea here is that, hold on, let me see, make sure let me make sure that my pinned message appears at the top. So I will give you the, right here. Yeah, so before I do that, so the idea here, to finish my thought, is you may be coming on to teach me something. In that case, I get smarter, we all get stronger, and that's the idea. So yeah, so let me find that referral, not the referral link, but the invite link, and I will post it in the comments right here. All right, and there it is. And I'm also going to go on and pin this so that it is pinned at the top of our chat. So if anybody wants to come on, that is the link you go into. I don't know if you have to create an account with StreamYard, because I'm not on that side of things. You guys know that better than I do. You have called in. But just in case, sign up. It's free. If you don't have to sign up, great. But that would be the link. I'd prefer that, I think everybody watching would prefer if you do call in to have your camera on so everybody can see your beautiful face. And, as everybody's seeing my face, seeing the consternation on my face and so on. So, that's the idea. But while we're waiting for a guest, I want to show you something here. Never done this before either. So this is a picture I just took because I thought that people might be interested in seeing this. Okay, can you hear me now? Let me know if you can hear me now. Is that working? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Here's what I think just happened, which is wild. I didn't realize this because I'm still starting out on all this. Sorry about that. I just gave a tour of the room and didn't say anything. It's because I took myself off stage, interestingly. Right there. Okay, so if I put myself back on stage, you have to see my ugly mug up there, but you guys can hear that now, I suppose. Now that, okay. Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, so I assume you can hear me now because my picture is up there. Is that correct? Okay. Okay, perfect. Great. It takes a while because there's a little bit of lag. Now, okay, so left to right, you can see my liquor cabinet, my guitar, right above that, my cowboy hat from Arkansas. You can see a chair or two that's out of frame, of course. Then going across the top, that's my setup here, little light setup and everything. Of course, you can see at the top right, I inherited my grandfather's antique gun. Unfortunately, it's not an original; it's a replica. And then you can see my son right there, right by the staircase. He got caught in frame there when I was taking the picture. And then you see right below the gun to the left is our family altar, which is really beautiful. So yeah, that's my setup. And yeah, so let me take this back off and Oliver. All right, he's just gonna spam the chat, I suppose. So again, last time we did this, I think it went extremely well. A few of the topics that we covered were things like free will. We covered God's existence. We covered, consciousness and some other things, moral subjectivism and so on. So there's a lot of choices and covering this. And so if anybody would like to call in, this is the idea. And I call this office hours, but honestly, get on here, talk about whatever you like, especially within the realm of philosophy. But I also, if you'll notice in the description, I construe philosophy pretty broadly. So anything from very basic level to the advanced level, everything from all of history of philosophy, from ancient Greek all the way to the present, including the Analytic and Continental distinctions in modern day philosophy that really didn't exist in the past. Anything from around the world. But I also include within that broad understanding and definition of construal philosophy, I include things like religious studies. Excuse me, because within the philosophy of religion, we also discuss the existence of God, of course. So as I am Catholic, it is also an interest of mine to discuss that as well. So, all right. So now, Oliver, since you're there, I don't think you would want to come on, but maybe Chelsea would want to come on. That would be entertaining. That'd be a first. Anybody who's brave enough. Again, this is meant to be very casual, very low-key, no pressure. Some other things we covered were things like moral disgust. Last time we got into the idea of we used one really hot button issue like incest, which obviously everybody has, strong opinions against incest. But here's the interesting thing is that if you remove the usual reason why people think that incest is wrong, that is, that it harms the offspring, if you have nothing else, so say, for example, like your first cousin in Utah is, you're allowed to marry your first cousin in the state of Utah. It's like totally legal. Now, what that does, well, only if you're over the age of 65 and you can no longer reproduce kids. What that does is it removes the penalty or the harm towards other people, namely the offspring. And then if that's all that it was, is that, the only reason why it was wrong is because it hurt your offspring. Once you remove that consequence, it's really hard to say why something like incest is wrong. So we discussed that. That got us into the topic on moral disgust, because it could be that, it seems icky, and that's why it's wrong. But of course, that's not a good reason. But yeah, so some really interesting things here and there that we discussed. But all right, I see Cameron is here. Very nice of you to join us. So let's pull you onto stage, and we'll split it like we do. And can
Hello again.
All right, I can hear you.
That's good. Is my camera all right?
Yeah. You're a little low. If you wanted to
Oh, sorry.
bring it down,
I'm in
but
my bed at the
perfect,
minute.
perfect. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So are
Okay.
you Cameron from last time? All right,
Yeah.
perfect. Good to
Yeah.
see your beautiful mug on here. All right.
Thank you. I will. This is a shorter document because I didn't really
Hmm.
prepare any for this time. I just wanted to get the ball rolling a bit with other people joining.
Of course, yeah. And last time, we went on for so long because there were so many people. Once it gets
Yeah.
rolling, it's just gonna go. And there were
Yeah.
even people waiting, at the end of 3 hours, and I was like, I can't do it anymore. So, all right, kick it
Yeah.
off
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
please. Okay, so
So I'll
you
probably
have
just push.
this. Add this to
Yeah.
stage.
I'll probably just push the same thing as I did last time, but I'll try and do it more succinctly
Okay,
and more sort of
yeah.
to the point. Um,
Okay.
so you question how a non-theist can ground normative truths, but what is the relevant difference between theism and atheism, such that theism can ground normativity and atheism seemingly can't? So that'd probably be the main question I'd ask.
Oops. All right. So theists can ground. You question how non-theists can ground normative truths. What is the relevance between theism and atheism, such that theism can ground normativity and atheism seemingly can't? All right. So yeah. So uh, I think that having God in the picture as the ground of all reality and the ultimate being, right there, um, provides something that atheism doesn't. Because if you don't, like, I gave the example of the simulation hypothesis, scenario. Because if there's somebody outside of this universe that says this is how things go, even if that's utterly subjective, right? Let's just grant that it is. Like, I don't think that it is, but even if that's utterly subjective, because that person is in such a different, like, ontological position than I am, namely all powerful, all knowing, can create things that I can't, just way more powerful, that's going to carry far greater weight than mine. So there's that, but you, so, so I, if you wanted to, and of course you're going to kick back and you're going to say, well, that doesn't seem to do the trick to ground, like to totally erase normativity on the atheist side. I think that, not to say anything for you, but I'll stop there. What's your thoughts on what I've said so far?
So from what I understand, you almost take a subjectivist approach, but you have the God's subjective approach is superior to ours. Would that be fair?
Assuming, yeah. So I don't buy subjectivism, but I'm trying to get as close to your position as possible. I don't even know if your position is subjectivism, but is it?
No, I'm a
Oh,
moral
okay, okay.
realist.
Okay. So, yeah, it's hard to keep all these ideas straight. Now, I'm a moral realist as well. So, okay, so this question is about how an atheist can ground moral realism. Is that the idea? Okay, gotcha.
Well, the normative facts of moral realism. So the atheist could say, okay, X is good, Y is bad, but how do they derive? From what I saw you asked, how do they derive? You ought to do X, you ought not do Y.
Hmm. Yeah, so let me ask you this. Where do you think the atheist would be getting these objective moral principles and odds from the normative dimension? You wanted to say, I think, let me speak for you, but go ahead and answer. Sorry.
Um, well, I'm not supposing any. Well, I have my own view about where they come from. I'm not particularly supposing any place they come from. I'm just sort of asking, how come the theist can do that and the atheist can't, on your view?
Yeah, got you. Um, well, I imagine you'd say something like this, and stop me if I'm getting you wrong or anything like that. But not that I'm describing your view, but it's something you could possibly say. I think we had talked about this before in comments. You had mentioned something like, suppose normativity is just baked into the universe. That way, you don't have to worry about deriving is or not, and that way, normativity is just already there. I can get on board with that, but it's then at that point just a brute fact that normativity, there's no explanation for why this would be the case. And so for the theist, though, it's not going to ground out just to a brute fact that normativity is just normativity, because then, of course, you're going to say, well, God, of course, is the ground of these normative facts. And So that's my answer. What do you think?
So maybe we should just sort of put aside anything that I would particularly say. If we just look at
Mhm.
atheism and theism prima facie, why would theism be able to ground normativity and atheism wouldn't? What
Let me
is
pull
it
this down.
about God existing that meant you could ground normativity, but I couldn't? I'm not an atheist, but that would be
Oh,
the
okay.
question.
Okay. Um, because God is ontologically basic. He's a fundamental entity of the universe. And so everything's just going to get grounded into him. And so normativity gets grounded into him by extension. So, yeah, but as an atheist, you don't have recourse to that. You would just say, I understand the tension here because then I imagine you'd push back and you'd say, well, I'm grounding normativity as just being basic. And then I would say, well, I think God is basic. You think normativity is basic. And so is that seem the right estimation of like where the impasse is?
I wouldn't particularly I wouldn't particularly push there. I'd
Yeah. Okay.
probably just ask God say, okay, God grounds everything. You say God grounds normativity. What does that mean? What grounds normativity?
That there would be an explanation for it. So I'm taking the tack of when anything exists, like the principle of sufficient reason or something, like anything exists, you're going to have an explanation. Either there's going to be no explanation, in which case the principle of sufficient reason doesn't apply, or if it does have an explanation for its existence, it's either going to be interior or exterior to it. So I'm saying with respect to normative facts, those are not. I'm going to deny that they have the explanation for the existence just within themselves, and I'm also going to deny that they have no explanation. I think that they do. And so I'll take that third tack and I'm going to say, well, the explanation lies outside. Now, I don't know. I guess I hadn't done too much reading on this to have arguments for that, other than really feeling the pull of that intuition, like that those shouldn't be like if you have a normative, like the same thing with like I guess an analogy is like as a parent, you have a kid being like, well, why should I do that? Like having that to be a brute fact is really unsatisfying. Look, you just should. Like it seems like there would be a reason there if you're going to have something be a should. See what I mean? So like I don't. Yeah, so that's kind of why I resist the idea of normativity being baked in and just being a brute fact. I resist that because I think it has an explanation for itself outside of something. Do this, you should do this, but why? That's going to be that further why, and this is what the thesis is going to point to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'd probably ask you've got the is-ought gap, right? And you're trying to find out where you derive normativity. So you have the two views, you have atheism and theism, and you're saying, okay, on theism we can ground normativity because we just have God and God grounds normativity. How does that even make sense? How can you can just suppose God to get an is from an ought, sorry, an ought from an is.
Yeah. So at that point, it's not. So this would be like the abductive approach. I'm not beginning here necessarily. I'm just saying that so yeah, I look at it like kind of like those plinko boards, kind of like the ball falls down and hits and it lands and it follows a certain path or whatever. Like you could follow this path that we're following so far and be like, okay, I need a ground normativity. Where do I go? And boom, I end up with God. I'm not looking at it like that. I'm looking at it as like, well, I believe in God for other reasons, and like I just get this bonus explanation, and it grounds normativity and the idea that, well, why ought I do X, Y, and Z? Why should I live a good moral life? I mean, yes, it's good for me, but why should I do things that are good for me? Like, why should I do things that are good for others? Or why ought I, unless it's not got a biological reason, but also like normative reasons that aren't moral. Like, why should, I don't know, why should we follow reason? Like, why should I live my life a certain way? You see what I mean? So these things, it's like, well, they need satisfying answers, I think, because that's just what anybody from when we were very young follow, and then that satisfying reason. So again, like I would arrive at God on independent grounds, and then this would just be like a bonus. Like, well, of course, like if I'm looking for if I'm looking for a satisfying explanation, I'm going to find that in something I'd already bought into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm just asking, okay, how does God ground that? So you might have God, and you
Mhm.
might say, okay, this is an added bonus that God can ground
Yeah.
normativity. But how does God ground normativity? In a way that an atheist couldn't appeal to for some reason.
Yeah. So I'd go back to those three possible reasons. It's not going to be that it has no explanation. It's not going to be the explanation is within. It's going to be that the explanation is from without. And so, how does it work as far as like functionally? The idea that how would God ground these things? I think in the same way that if I say to my son, "You ought not do this thing," I would have a reason or an explanation as to why you ought not do these things, and that would be grounded in certain things like for his health and for his moral development and so on and so on. That's much different, of course, but just given the analogy of how a parent would do it for a child. Now, how God would ground it, it would be that plus, of course, we'd go back to like, I don't know if you saw that video on Euthyphro Dilemma, how the classical theist just identifies God with the good, but you might be familiar with
Well,
the
I
solution
know that
already. Yeah.
response. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be that would be what I mean by God being the ground of normativity is just the good then and in this context, the proper explanation, the satisfying explanation, the good reason why I ought to do a certain thing. That's not going to be something exterior. It's going to be interior to God's character. It's because God just is the good. God is goodness as himself. And so when I say that's grounded in God, that's what I'm saying. It's being in line with God's character. And this gets into some sort of like, you can go mysticism here if you wanted to, but I don't think you I suppose you could go there eventually, but like even before that step, Christian thinkers talk about being unified with God and even loving God. And then Thomas Aquinas talks about how love is two things. It's willing the good of the other. So God does this with us. He wills our good. And also wanting to be unified with the object of love. And so this idea that if God wills my good and then I want to be unified with God, God wants to be unified with me. That's what we're talking about. Like when we're approaching the character of God, approaching holiness, like that's what I'm doing. So that it gets into at that point, maybe beyond that, we would get into some mysticism, but yeah, that would be some philosophical explanations as well. What does that sound like? Probably not too gobbledygook, I hope.
No, I do understand the Thomas position. I think Craig takes a
Mm-hmm.
position as well. God is good. I understand
Mm-hmm.
that, but that's not grounding normativity. That's grounding morality. So when I was an
Mm-hmm.
atheist, no, I'm not actually, but if I was an
Mm-hmm.
atheist, I could just say, okay, pleasure is the good, and that's how I ground normativity. But you're not grounding normativity. You're grounding goodness. How do I ground the fact that you ought do what maximizes the goodness, and you ought not do what maximizes the badness? Right? How would you
Mm-hmm.
derive that in a way an atheist couldn't?
I think it would just be so God being identified with the good. We start there, and then the ought is just you ought to worship God and be united with God. That was where the ought would be driven. In other words, that I should prefer God, Creator, over something that's not God, not Creator.
Where do you derive that, or that should from an atheist couldn't?
That's a great question. It gets into some real ontological questions. This is really fascinating here because I think that when God creates, he, you know, C.S. Lewis talked about this existential argument for God, this longing. Like we're kind of left with like a hole in our heart. Some people put it, and that we're drawn to that. This sort of like I know that I'm made for something else. I want to live on forever, although I can't. And of course, many atheists will say, well, don't give in to that. But it's like Christians have an explanation for why that desire is there, not just present in one or two people, but universally it's present. Why we want to live on, why we desire the divine. And I think, interestingly, if you wanted to think about normativity being baked in, I think that's just kind of a standard default preset on human souls, like human minds, that we are drawn to beautiful things. We're drawn to divine things. And I think when God
But
creates, there's a part of Him, like made in the image of God, that seeks back to its Creator. That's where I'd kind of
mhm.
locate or try to start to locate. I haven't really thought much about what grounds normativity, but that's probably where I'd start to locate it.
The problem is you're still deriving an ought from, and as you've still got, okay, the soul is this
Yeah,
way, the soul desires this, so
yeah,
the soul ought to unify with that. I mean, as an atheist, I could say the same thing. I could say, okay, the
hmm
soul desires pleasure, the soul wants to be unified with pleasurable experiences, so we ought to do this. That's not how I do it. Obviously, I say it's baked into reality, but you're doing something that an atheist could equally do, and I don't see the relevant difference between atheism and theism here.
Right. And I think, yeah, I think I we also touch base on this again in comments because I think, and I confess my ignorance here because I think there are some Thomistic accounts, like I mentioned today or yesterday to you, that do seek to just start with normativity basic like this. God made it this way. So even if you start with the description, this is the way that things are. I mean, the fact that like they don't see it as odd distinction. Like the way that things are, just the way they ought to be. So now I think the question then would be like, does the atheist have recourse to that in the same way as what you're suggesting? I suppose they could. I mean, theoretically speaking, they could go down that route. But then at that point, it's like, okay, well, what is the relevant difference in the payoffs and the difference in explanations, if that makes sense? Like the idea is that you have God who grounds this, and you have this full, robust, wholehearted explanation with respect to the creator creating and creatures being drawn back to the creator and everything. On atheism, it's just like it goes back to that brute factness part of it, and it's just yeah. I mean, I suppose you would if you're building an ontology, you could arrive here, but you'd kind of be stuck that point at a really I mean, and some people do this, like not to say that this is impossible, but I think some people do this, and then it just yeah, to me I find that just really unsatisfying, if that makes sense.
Well, so in a Thomist view or a Christian view, broadly, you would have the brute fact that God is good. So you'd have the brute fact that if God were to
Yeah,
exist, he would be the object of goodness. That's
yeah.
no different from a utilitarian atheistic perspective, where if pleasure exists, pleasure is the good. So to me, they're equally as brute. I don't see why the theistic hypothesis does any more explanatory
Mm.
work in this context.
Well, even I think Aristotle recognized he recognized the function that pleasure plays, but like I think this is in book one, I think chapter 3 or 4 or 5, where he's discussing like the three kinds of life. He's already identified the summum bonum, the telos, the ultimate telos of human beings, which is eudaimonia, of course, to flourish. And he says basically the next step is like, well, how do I arrive at that? He doesn't really frame it this way, but it's the idea of like, okay, what kind of life should I live so that I can arrive at that telos? And he does consider pleasure, but immediately tosses it away as an explanation because he thinks it's too, it's not intrinsic, it's too instrumental of a good. Like I'm always seeking pleasure for the sake of something else. And so he, obviously eudaimonia would be the ultimate telos in the sense for him, in the sense of being the real purely intrinsic thing. But there are three lives that he considers. One is the life of virtue, and then the life of honor, and then the life he does consider life of pleasure. But I think, yeah. So if I were to seek pleasure my whole life, it doesn't seem like I would end up flourishing. That he's the argument he's going to make. So I don't know if this helps at all, but I'm just recalling these things kind of stream of consciousness.
So
But I don't
maybe
know if he'd find it
pleasure aside.
satisfying if pleasure would. In other words, I don't think he'd find it fitting that pleasure would be uh, a brute fact and the ultimate basic good, even on Aristotle. Yeah.
So I could put pleasure aside. I could use any example. I could say
Okay.
virtue is the good. I could say whatever is the good. It's just an example. So
Okay.
from what I understand, you're saying, okay, the theist can ground goodness in God. They can say God is good. That is whatever sort of fact it is, and from whatever sort of metaphysic they have, they can ground normativity. Going back to your claim that atheists can't bridge the result gap, but theists can, which I think you
Mm-hmm.
made that claim in one of your videos. Why
Mm-hmm.
can't the atheists do the same thing? I'm just not seeing that difference. Why can't the atheists say we have this objective good, which is whatever, it could be pleasure, it could be virtue,
Mm-hmm.
it could be the goodwill, it could be anything. Why can't they do the same thing and just say, okay, well, you just ought to do that because that's what the soul desires, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, I'm not feeling the pull of this intuition that it's um Yeah, that things like pleasure or virtue, whatever it may be, can ground out in something basic. Because it seems to me like it's just obvious that it can't. Like I would always
What
be,
do you
in other
mean
words, I would
ground out into
always,
being basic?
in other words, it's just being a brute fact. That's the origin of normativity. It seems like it'd always be something that I could say, well, why do that? Why do that?
Why do
Why
pleasure?
ought I to do that? Yeah, why ought I
Why,
to do that?
like I said, there's something about God, right? Why ought you? Um,
Hmm.
I guess you're a natural law theorist. Why ought I follow the telos of my natural faculties? I don't know if that's how you'd construe natural law theory,
Hmm.
but why ought I do that? I could ask you the same question, right?
Yeah, yeah. I would just say that that's not just how I was evolutionarily programmed or just blindly kind of randomly programmed, but that's how God programmed me. So
Mm.
I have that
Why ought I
explanation
follow
there.
God's program?
I think because it's most fitting, it's most apt, and yeah, that
So
seems right to me.
I feel like that's a normative claim as well, right? So either
And
so
it's for my good, and
what
it's because I was told to. If that makes sense.
okay, so you're grounding
But
normativity in
but sorry, but you're
okay.
seeing like you're getting answers there that are like, well, why should I do this? And you're getting a because, but it's not a brute
Hmm.
because. So so for
Hmm.
me, that's
But it will ground off
satisfying.
in a brute, right?
The brute that it grounds out in is something like God is good, and that I follow what God says I ought to do because God is good and because I trust God. And if I do trust God, which that's that's it's good that I do that because it's representative of reality. Then so yeah, so the bruteness grounds out in just God's goodness.
So what does it mean God says I ought to do something?
What do you mean? What does it mean?
So you have this um being of pure act who is goodness, who is numerically identical to what is good, and he has set up this natural order. When God says you ought to follow this natural order, like what does that mean? Does that mean he's prescribing goodness or he's prescribing um normativity subjectively? I just don't see how God could.
That's one way people
Um,
go. I don't think that. Well, I don't take a subjective approach with respect to God. Just says this, but I think even if you did, it would still carry the weight that a human subjectivism wouldn't. But
so
sorry
okay,
to interrupt.
so
Go ahead.
God objectively says you ought to do things,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But where does that ought in what God is saying come from?
I
That's what
think
I'm
that
asking.
yeah. So two things: negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. The positive reinforcement is for my good. Negative reinforcement is because there's punishment if I don't, and that punishment can include scary things like hell and eternal damnation, or it could just be natural consequences. Like if I don't do this, I'm
But
going to end up being a certain kind of person.
that punishment isn't categorical. That punishment isn't sort of categorical normative. It's just you ought to do this because you don't like the consequences if you don't. And same with the positive reinforcement. I mean, if you say, okay, you ought to do this because it is good, you're still deriving or trying to derive an ought from an is. You've got it is good, so you
Hmm.
ought to do it. That's the view I take. I think
Hmm.
fundamentally, if something is good, you ought to do it. That's so I'd say it's baked into reality. It's baked into the nature of moral
Hmm.
goodness. You could take the
Yeah.
same route, but I'm taking that route as a non-theist,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
what I'm doing. So again, there seems to be no relevant difference. And okay,
Well.
that's about the positive reinforcement. The
Well.
negative
Okay.
reinforcement isn't that egoism in some sense?
Yeah. So I hold a virtue ethics view, not an egoistic view. Um, it
Well,
shares features. It shares features with egoism, and sometimes gets flack for this. But it's not just for like ethical egoist is all about I ought to do things for my own good, even if it's going to hurt other people. The virtue ethicist does not take that approach. I'm doing things for my own good and for my own flourishing, and the things I do for other people is also for my own flourishing as well because I'm becoming a kind of person. But ultimately, and you see this in Aristotle, like he says things like, well, the social good is like actually the ultimate good. And then later in the Nicomachean Ethics, he gets into friendship and he gets into how to how to cultivate moral education in society and what's good for society overall. So like it's clear in my view in the Nicomachean Ethics that it's not just about individuals, it's about groups of individuals, namely societies. So even on virtue ethics of Aristotelian kind and again into Thomism, you get not just like this utter egoism where it's just all about the individual, but it's about my good for the sake of others and their good. Like some virtues, like it's impossible, I think, to cultivate certain virtues without the help of others, like compassion. Like I need another agent there to be compassionate to, or truthfulness. Like we do say, oh, I need to be true to myself or tell myself the truth or something. I think that's derivative. Like in order for it to function properly in the way it's supposed to function, like you need another human being there. And so that may be the case with many, if not most, virtues. So yeah. Um, so I, yeah, all that to say, and I know you said some other things there, and maybe you can repeat what you said that I didn't catch, but just with respect to the hedonism part. But what else did you say?
The part before, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it was just saying that okay, you have X is for my good, therefore I ought to do it. But that's the same thing
Mhm.
an atheist could do. An
Right.
atheist could say pleasure is good, so I ought to do it.
Yeah,
It's again baking normativity into
yeah.
reality.
Well, I think that you can dissect what the atheist or non-theist is saying at that point when they say it is good, therefore I ought to do it. People give different variations on what good is. Does that mean one's welfare and well-being? Does that mean good in the sense of pleasure? Does that mean good in the sense of usefulness,
Uh,
utility?
the
It's going to depend
moral
on how
goodness.
they. Okay, so it is morally good, they ought to do it. And there I would just say, well, where's the moral goodness coming from? And so many atheists,
Well,
they'll say, well, it's evolutionarily, biologically, derived or something. But you're just saying it's just fundamental. But how did it get there?
well, I could ask the same thing, right? I could say, oh, how did God come to be good? How did that get there, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Under your view, I guess.
right. And of course, I'm going to answer that it is God's always been good. Of course, He's not changed. He's unchangeable, immutable, and that just is His character. He's identical to the good.
Yeah.
But for the atheists, it's not just that goodness exists. Like for the theist, goodness exists in someone's character. And that's just how it looks for you and me, like human beings. You have goodness in someone's characters and actions and so on. For an atheist who just looks at the universe as just like this kind of, for a lack of better phrase, something like cold, dark place, like these normative facts just seem to kind of, they don't seem to be inherent in anything. They don't inhere in a person necessarily. I mean, they do, but like you're saying, if it's a fundamental aspect of just the universe as a whole. I mean, could I ask you, like, do you think that, on your view, that goodness would exist even if there were no people in the universe?
What do you mean goodness? Do you mean there would be something which is good, or the object of good exists? There's
So I
a
guess,
distinction there.
yeah, yeah, that's a good question because it depends on if you want to go Platonic or Aristotelian here.
Well,
Let's go
I do
Aristotelian.
have.
Like in the
I've been
absence of
thinking
human
about that.
beings, yeah. So in the absence of
Uh,
human beings, there are no people around to uh, be the basis of a good moral character or even good moral actions, good moral intentions, and so on. So would there still be goodness in the universe absent human beings? Moral goodness.
well, I'll try and answer that, and then I'll try and go back to what I was saying before. But
Okay, go ahead.
under my view, let's just assume my view is Platonist.
Okay.
I think it's logically true. So the same as 1 + 1 = 2. The same that you you can't have a square circle. Pleasure is the good. That's what I think. So even if there were no people,
Yeah.
that truth would still pertain. But pleasure itself wouldn't
Okay.
pertain because, of course, you need agents to have pleasure in their mind, right? So that's a
Yeah.
distinction. But going back to what I was saying before, you say God is good. God is the object of goodness, which
Mhm.
grounds normativity, and you just accept that if something is good, it can ground normativity. You say you view that as sort of just a fundamental truth. Why
Yeah.
can't the atheist do the same? Why can't the atheist just say, um, we have pleasure, and pleasure is the object of goodness, so pleasure can ground normativity? Now, you sort of talked about grounding in God's character. I would
Mhm.
question that. I don't think the goodness of God is grounded in God qua a person. the goodness of God is grounded in God qua God's nature. So it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
I
right.
think that avoids
I'm just using character as
subjective.
like a helpful heuristic, but it's not meant to be
Yeah.
technical. But you're right. Yeah,
Um.
yeah.
So sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think just it would then be a difference in the object, or I prefer to say the subject of the goodness, where it's seated. In scholastic terms, seated under something. And so the theist is going to say it's God. The atheist is going to say this is why I asked. I was like, where would goodness be located? Would it be existed at all? And you say, and so I guess it would be an emergent property of humans. That's understandable things like or maybe not emergent, could be emergent, but in the sense that it's like yeah, it would be yeah. Anyway, so and so then at the end of the day, it would be like, okay, well, what if we're just comparing those two things, the object or the subjects, let's say, of goodness, where it's seated? Like, how do those two things fare? And so I'm going to say it's God, and that can ground out in his character's nature, whatever you have you. And it seems to do those things quite well. Like if you're just thinking within the confines of a theory, like it has a lot of theoretical explanation, a lot of theoretical scope, and so on and so on. For the atheist, sorry, or the non-theist who says, well, it's just going to ground out in I don't know what, and so that's that fill in the blank, and they have options, of course, but like where is that goodness located? Where is that goodness situated and seated, and then like does it have the same theoretical and explanatory scope and power is the God does? And that I think that's where I'm thinking like this one wins
Yeah.
out because it just have more explanatory power and scope, if that makes sense.
So I don't think we could get into a whole debate about the
Yeah.
explanatory power of God as a theory, but I'll try and stay away from that. I don't
Yeah.
think that shows how atheists can't ground normativity and theists can. So you
Mm,
say that, okay, theists can ground it in the nature of God and atheists can ground it in whatever, I don't know. But the theist can ground it in the nature of God and the atheist can ground it in the nature of anything. If they wanted to,
right.
they might have their own arguments, their own whatever. I
Yeah.
happen to ground it in the nature of pleasure. So I say goodness is pleasure. That's part of the nature of goodness, part of the nature of pleasure. You say that goodness is in the nature of God, and God is in the nature of goodness, or however you want to
Hmm.
construe it. What's the relevant difference here again? But that one can ground normativity and the other one can't.
That so at that point you're right. So let me rephrase what you saw in the other video with one caveat. I think that the non-theist could, let's say, attempt to, in parentheses, I like using parentheses, attempt to ground normativity in whatever it is in their ontology that they're working with. Like I say, I fill in the blank. Um, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a matter of like feasibility. Like, does it have the explanatory scope and power? And I think that theism does, and then the non-theistic. So because some non-theistic views, like panpsychism, they do this. Like I think I mentioned this comment. They do this with consciousness, and so it's hard to explain consciousness just coming into a naturalistic, materialistic world. If you start with matter, how do you get something like consciousness? It's not matter, not identical to matter. That somehow springs from it. We're having the same trouble here in the same kind of form of the problem with respect to normativity. And so they like you're attempting to do like bake it in to some whatever already. And so the panpsychist is just going to say, well, just consciousness is everywhere. It's in everything. Matter just is conscious already. And so that's one way to do it. I'm not saying that you're doing that in the idea that everything is normative, but that just that it would already be present, and so you don't have that problem. Um,
But
and
isn't that the
so,
same thing you're doing? You're just baking normativity into what goodness is. So this is where I'm
mhm.
getting at. I'll try and
Okay,
explain it as best I can.
sure.
Okay, we have atheism and we have theism. Under your theism, you have God is the object of goodness, and what is good is what ought to be done. You have those two facts and you tie them together. The atheist can do the same thing.
Hmm.
They can have, for example, pleasure is the object of good, and what is good ought to be done. These are the
Hmm.
exact same claims. There's no relevant difference between theism and atheism. So you might say God has more explanatory power, but speaking in the context of what we're speaking in the context of metaethics, why does that show that theism can ground normative claims and atheism can't?
Yeah, so I think they could attempt to, like I said, but I think that you might be underappreciating what it means for God to ground and normativity, and to say, and maybe I'm just not explaining it well, but to when God says something is good versus when a human being says, "Oh, that's good. I recognize it as such." Like that, worlds apart, infinitely apart.
but
Like when
it's
God
not
says
it's not that
something's good
God
versus,
saying it's not that God's
in
saying
some
something is good.
cases,
It's
it
that God is
is
good. So you're saying from your
right.
perspective, God
That
is
would
the
be the
object of goodness. I'm saying from
yeah.
my perspective, for example, pleasure is the object of goodness. From
Yeah.
our perspectives, not from God's. I don't see the difference. And
Mm-hmm.
even if you say from God's perspective, what allows God to make normative truths out of non-normative ones?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll have to think more about this, but I think it does parallel in form anyway with respect to psychism, or sorry, panpsychism. Um, the idea that you would want to somehow avoid that problem. If I were to be pushed on this, like you're doing now, I think I'd say that the theist doesn't have to worry about deriving um, an ought from an is. And you're pressing here
It
to
could be
say,
right.
well, I don't think that the atheist would have to worry about that either. And I think that that's true on some versions, some worldviews. Like that, if you want to just bake it in, yeah, that's fine. But then at that point, it becomes a conversation about, well, which one has the explanatory stuff? Yeah, so that's kind of
Well,
where I'm
I guess
settling here. But if you want to give the last word
maybe just to
here,
close it off. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, sure.
What I was originally asking was how can an atheist derive? Sorry, how can a theist derive an ought from an is, but an atheist can't? And
Mm-hmm.
I guess I've
Yep.
presented a worldview which doesn't suppose God, which can do the same thing that the theistic worldview can. So maybe the theistic hypothesis has more explanatory virtues and perhaps
Mm-hmm.
is more parsimonious or something like that. But I think it's still been shown that the atheist, well, if we just take atheism to be the belief there are no gods, can do the exact same thing that theism can in respect to morality, putting aside other ideas of
Mm-hmm.
explanatory virtue in other domains, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'd say to finish off.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I will give this more thought. It's also worth mentioning it you brought up when you're let me just say this final thing and then I'll give you the last word if you like to press back on this, but when you're doing like theory building, parsimony is just one criterion, of course.
Yeah,
That's why I mentioned other things like explanatory scope, explanatory power. You have I guess beauty, some things, orderliness, and so on and so on. And there's a lot of these criteria when it comes to theory building. The one that we usually glom onto, of course, is parsimony, and that's only in the case of all things are equal. Like, um, you should prefer the simpler one, or don't multiply necessities beyond, or sorry, don't multiply entities beyond necessity. Um, yeah, but I think taking into account all these, that's why I went that direction of explanatory scope, explanatory power. At that point, it would be okay. Now that we've got two theories, and you're right, you taught me something here today. Like you were like, okay, you could just and so on the record, I can go back and say yes, atheists can, on some views, attempt to derive normativity. It's not just to derive it, but just to say that it's already there, and so they don't have to worry about the is-ought problem. That's fine with me. And that's why I said, okay, now at that point, you're just going to have to like compare the two theories or postulations or something. So, but anyway, you want to give the last word here, and then we'll let
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
else on.
Well, I mean, yeah. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you, but I think that you can take other views apart from theory building. I guess there are other ways of deciding what view to believe in. But I think, yeah, at the end of the day, atheism and theism can equally ground normativity. There are some theistic views which you would say can't ground normativity. There are some atheistic views
Mm-hmm.
which you would say can't ground normativity. I don't think there's anything intrinsic to either view um, that says anything about grounding normativity per se. So I think that's what I'd
Gotcha.
finish off
Gotcha.
on.
Cool. All right. Well, it was a
Well,
pleasure as
thank you very
always.
much.
Definitely. Thank you for coming on, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.
All right. See ya. All right, cool. So we got a couple of people waiting. I see Locke, I see Nathan. I saw Locke in here first. So Nathan, if you want to hang tight, then we will be with you in just a minute. But I'm bringing you on now, Locke. And do you happen to have a camera? I know people like to prefer to see people, but if you don't have one, that's fine. All right. So we can hear you. I think your mic's hot. So whenever you're ready, you can jump right in. If you're not ready, we can let Nathan go. All right. I can't hear anything, and let's see, you seem to be muted. Let me see private chat. Okay, cool. His mic is bugging. So in that case, you work out the tech stuff, and then we'll bring Nathan in here. So nice to meet you, Nathan. I don't know if we've met
Nice to
before.
meet
Have
you.
we seen you? Have we seen you on comments or anything like that?
I think on comments possibly,
Okay.
and that was one of the things I'm happy to talk about. Is I left a comment, and I think we talked about that a little bit. But I'm also happy to talk about any other topic or what previous calls were talking about as well.
Okay, cool.
But
Go easy on me because Cameron, he gave me a run for my money here. I'd like to not, for each new caller, this is just selfish of me, just to be like, oh, yeah, you're right, you're right, you're right. But it may end up being that way. I'm totally open to that. But what do you want to talk about?
I mean, there's just one thing on that last call. I didn't catch the whole call, so tell me if this wasn't covered.
Okay.
Um, but in terms of saying that there's like an is ought problem or something like that, I guess I tend not to think that there's like a problem where people are trying to derive sort of normative claims from sort of descriptive claims or something. I tend to think that it's more just distinguishing between two sort of different types of claims and saying that you can't do it's just that if all of your premises are descriptive claims, you're not going to be able to deductively get a normative claim from those premises if they're all just statements of matters of fact. And I would think that that would be the case for basically all worldviews, like whether you're a theist, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
an atheist, whether you're anything else. You're not going to be able to deductively derive some normative claim from just is claims, and that's how I take what I take him to be saying. I don't know.
Yeah, that seems right to me. Yeah, I think both of us, both Cameron and I, appreciated the intuitive pull of that, the strength of that claim that you're saying. Like if you have, just think about it in a syllogism, if you have a bunch of descriptive claims, you're not going to ever arrive at normative claims and vice versa. Um, yeah, well, it might be vice versa. Like I ought to do murder, I ought not to murder somebody. So it is the case that I ought not to murder. That is a descriptive claim out of a normative claim, but that's like,
Yeah, yeah,
weird.
I know what you.
But
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So from descriptive to normative, yeah, you're just not going to get that leap. So I think both of us agreed with that. Yeah.
yeah. There's a paper. I forget who the guy is. If it's called, his name's like Pigeon or something, and he uses the example of like hedgehog, non-hedgehog facts.
Mm,
It's like if all your premises are like, not non-hedgehog facts, you're not going to get like a hedgehog fact from it. And it's just, rather than it being like anything specific to do with morality that has anything kind of deep or profound to really say about that domain, it's more just a point about like properties of deductive logic generally or something.
hmm Yeah. So the word incommensurate comes to mind. This idea that you're just not, they're just different. It's a category error. You're just getting a kind of a set of facts, and then you're getting another set of facts, and just like there's just no really communication between the two. Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I've never
yeah.
heard of this. Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that far to. I think he's using that for rhetorical reasons. The idea of hedgehog and non-hedgehog, because that they're like diametrically opposed, so that one's a negation of the other. I don't think that they're that diametrically opposed as to be negations, but yeah, I get the rhetorical push of it that they're really really different. Yeah.
So the thing I'd like to comment on as well was, and maybe this will jog your memory, was I think there was like a post that you put on TikTok that was,
Hmm.
I'm not going to be able to remember exactly what the contents of it was, but it was something to do with the paradox of the stone. And how there's like this response that,
Mm-hmm.
um, like what the request is for, he who can do all things to create an object that has properties such that he couldn't do something with respect to it. And so the idea is that there's like an inherent kind of contradiction in the question that's being raised for God to do with his powers.
Yeah.
Um, and so then the idea is, and it's more intuitive or something, that God wouldn't be able to do logically inconsistent things. I guess I don't personally know why I would believe that.
Mm.
As in the intuition that, like, I don't share that intuition that God can't do logically contradictory things. And the reason the reason I would give would be something like, for other sort of types of things that we would have issues with other types of beings like ourselves being able to do, whether they be physically impossible things, or even things we might consider to be metaphysically impossible in some cases. Like, we might say, well, God's able, or even things we might really have a hard time conceiving. Like, what does it mean to conceive of like reanimating a body in a resurrection or something? We say, well, but God can do these sorts of things. So why, when it comes to sort of like logical possibility, do we say, God can't do those things? And I guess I don't have like a strong reason to think either way. And I don't know, I think you maybe disagree with that. And I thought that could be interesting to explore.
Yeah. I think, so I'm following Aquinas on this, and he says it this way. He just says that it's better to put it like what things are possible, not just what's possible for God. So if something is impossible, it's just going to be impossible, full stop. It's not anything extra special that we say it's impossible for God. It just was impossible to begin with. So God can only do things that are just possible to begin with. If that makes any sense?
No, I can see how that would be.
Let's put it in the context of omnipotence. That is, so like he discussed this in a question. I can pull it up here if you like, but on omnipotence, and he says it doesn't. This is why Thomas will say it doesn't limit God's power in any way, because logical possibility is like if it's possible to do, and then it's not like having more power will let you do something that's impossible to do. If that makes sense.
Right. I see. I think maybe in my thinking about it, I can't see if I don't already believe that whatever is logically impossible isn't possible in any sense. I don't see why I would necessarily believe that. So even suppose I believed, like whatever is possible, God is going to be able to do it in that same sense of possibility, right? But then in terms of like all senses of possibility, I can't see, for example, there are different mappings or taxonomies people come up with. Like one thing people will sometimes say is that what is logically possible is going to be like a broader category than, say, what is metaphysically possible or something like that. And but I think another way, I think I can sort of imagine things being different, though I'm not exactly clear on what I'm supposed to be imagining. But stuff that's pretty weird in philosophy, I guess.
Yeah.
I can imagine metaphysical possibility actually encompassing like a broader set where you'd even have like logically impossible things existing, and it would just be like super kind of weird. And then if our sense of possibility is like whatever the broadest sense of possibility is, then and God exists, then for that view we would say, well, God can do logically impossible things, you see. And I believe there are some, this obviously doesn't mean that it's right, but I think there's various sort of people who have thought this. I think like Descartes was someone who thought God could do logically impossible things.
Yeah. It was weird. Descartes pushed the bounds on this in the sense of, but I think not. Well, let me put it this way. So obviously his whole foundationalistic approach and rationalistic approach, where it's all methodological skepticism. He's chipping away at things he can know, and he's like, obviously something like a mirage or something, that's something that I can't rely on, because, and then he gets down to, and he even dismisses things like mathematical truths, like if 2 + 2 = 4, like he's like, well, I could be wrong about that. And I think what he's doing there, and Descartes' a mathematician, so I trust him on this, is not that not that the certainty is wrong, but it's not that the mathematical truths are not then true. The problem is with my confidence in them. It's like I'm the receiver error, and so if that makes sense. Like I could
like my ability to doubt them, sort of thing.
Yeah, like I could be wrong about that, because the way that he sets it up is then it's like, well, somebody could be deceiving me. He doesn't say somebody could be making the numbers be different. He's not saying that. And so it does seem that it's not logically possible, or at least you don't have an argument there, you in general, not you particular, to say that, oh, it's logically possible to change mathematical truths. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say that somebody's changing the truth. He's saying that somebody's deceiving me, making it such that I believe that 2 + 2 = 5 or something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess, the reason I was using Descartes is not because he provides, not because that would be like a good reason to think that this is like a good thing to believe, but maybe just to establish that not everyone has thought of God and theism in exactly the same way. There are, even to go with people like Graham Priest as a Buddhist, right? Arguably his concept of the nothing is very similar to a sort of apophatic conception of God or something. And within that, he's sort of talking in terms of like true contradictions and things like that, which, okay, it's incredibly weird. I'm not saying it's a particularly normal way of thinking about things at all, but just to say that I don't see why I don't have anything that I'm particularly confident in to sort of constrain what God can do in that way, and then like reason about God's action as a result of that.
Got you. So it's a procedural question. I think it's like, if we're talking about possibility in terms of conceivability, if I'm getting you right, then like your conceivability, your ability to conceive things is going to be a little bit different than mine, and so on and so on and so on. So then like possibility is just kind of up for grabs. It doesn't seem like these are rigid categories. Am I hearing you right on that?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, okay. that definitely, that is one of the concerns. I think there's a whole bunch of pretty complicated things that are going to go into what you think the relationship is between like metaphysical possibility, logical possibility, epistemic possibility. And I don't have like principled reasons to really go anyway with drawing those mappings.
Just to, I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but just let everybody know. So there are different forms of possibility. Logical possibility is the most broad, and if to say something's logically impossible, that would just cut it off. It's just not impossible. Sorry, looks like we glitched out there for a sec.
Yeah, you're back.
Hopefully you're still there, Nathan. All right, so are we still on? Okay, good. So I still have you. I hope you still have me, and it might be a problem with my internet. Okay,
I think you're a little bit choppy, but yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think we're coming back in. My son needs to get off the internet. He's watching this on the same internet. What are you doing, dude? Use your phone or something, man. All right. So logical possibility is the most broad, of course. Then you get into metaphysical possibility, and then there are other forms beyond that, like physical possibilities. It's not possible for me to fly, but it's metaphysically possible. I could fly, maybe. So that's just background here. Now, when I think when it comes to logical possibility, I think intuitions differ on what's metaphysically possible, and I think that's where you get the difference. And I wouldn't be bothered at all if you're like, yeah, some things are going to be metaphysically possible. Okay, and then logical possibility, though, I don't think that you get that kind of movement, the arbitrariness, because it's just a matter, you just start off with law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, and then move from there.
Maybe, so here's a point about where I think that logical possibility can get weirder, right? Okay. Firstly, you've got different systems of logic, and they will say different things. And some, for example, it might not seem, because that is the most common way that logic gets taught, that bivalent logics are but there are other logics. And then just a further consideration as well would be when you get into metalogical proofs and stuff. So those would be your proofs about your logical systems. And you get these weird sort of proofs that like the P equals MP sort of problem. The idea being that there are certain, you can prove, and I can't walk you through the proof unfortunately, but from certain axiomatized systems, there are some statements that will be true, but aren't actually derivable within that system. And so, if you're thinking of logic in those terms, how do you then think of logical possibility, right? Because would you say there's a statement like that is a statement of that formalized system that is true, but not derivable from the axioms of the system? How does that then fit into your kind of possibility space, right? it
Yeah.
can get weird, I think.
Yeah,
With
so yeah, you're right. I'm not so I have been brought up on bivalent logic. I'm not a fan of this multivalent logic with respect to like true, not true, and in between. That just doesn't make sense to me. This three-valued logic that you find many times over in Eastern systems. So maybe I'm biased in that respect. It's possible, but I don't I don't know what kind of possible it is, but it's possible, you know. But I think with respect to the systems, and I do remember taking like I took like 3 different graduate courses in logic. I don't remember all of it, but like I am familiar a little bit with like proving S5, modal logics, register machines, and took a mathological course along with like mathematic graduate students and so on. Don't remember all of it, but I got that experience of like seeing like, okay, how do the inner workings work? And you do get different systems, S4, S5, and so on. But I think that if you're just thinking with respect to God and what's logically possible, I don't even think you have to go that complex, to be honest with you, unless you're you're trying to compare it and contrast with bivalent logic with multivalent logic. I think that would be the only comparison, because you're saying that God can both lift a stone and not lift a stone. I guess multivalent logic would just say, yeah, it can't. Yeah, that's possible. Like, but that seems so absurd to me that I don't know what to say in response to anybody who rejects that. Like, we're at such an impasse. I just like, okay, we'll start somewhere else, I guess.
Well, this is kind of the point, right? It's like, and actually, I have a very practical question then as a result of this that will be
Sure.
interesting to ask after. But just this is kind of where I'm coming from. Is like, you know, if you reach a certain point with all of the stuff that's out there in philosophy, and then you know you're trying to reason about these like grand theories of everything, like theism versus atheism stuff. You know, there's so much on the table in so many different ways that you can divide things up that, you know, to for example, choose classical logic as this firm starting point of foundation, it almost seems rather arbitrary, or like cooking the books or something, as opposed to going, why go with that as opposed to some of the system? You know, they're both on an equal playing field in terms of what they can do. It would only be, I mean, if you had some particular thing you were trying to do, you might be able to say, well, this one's better for doing that than this one.
Right.
But if you said the thing you're trying to do is prove God's existence, that would almost be begging the question, right? Either way, because you choose the one that gets you to the conclusion you wanted to get you to, or stopped you getting to that conclusion. And so, yeah, I guess I have these problems when it comes to thinking about theism versus atheism or naturalism or whatever in this kind of way, because I just don't even know how to make principled choices about, you know, where the boundaries even are on these things.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a practical question, and having done a lot of this, yeah. So I think a couple of things here. So I think it does bottom out eventually into like once you get very basic, like what system of logic, classical logic or multivalent. I think at that point it's just certain things are just going to be self-evident. And like me, modus ponens, if P then Q, P therefore Q, like that's self-evident. You cannot demonstrate the truth of modus ponens without assuming the truth of modus ponens. You know what I mean? Like, so it has to be self-evident, you know? Otherwise it's circular. So at some point it's going to bottom out in something, with any system.
Well, so I agree with you that, look, I'm definitely not making a case for like global skepticism or something like that.
Of course, yeah. No, I wouldn't either.
Just to say, I agree with you, like in the sense that you're going to have to take something for granted, or you're just not going to be able to like meaningfully even discuss the problems, or you know, like something is going to be fixed in place, right? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so I think I'm past this point of worrying about this, because I did used to worry about this, and I'll say where I am now. So like, I used to be sort of this like grab bag, you know, some people call it, with respect to metaphysics and ontology, they call it like a lunchbox or lunch pail ontology or something along those lines. But it's like, grab what you can, try to fit it into a system so that it's not mutually contradictory and so it's coherent and so on, and just put in whatever you want, but it's not systematized. Like these modern thinkers, like they were systems. They were big systems that they built, Spinoza, Leibniz, Descartes, and so on. You don't see that nowadays. You just kind of see piecemeal things that people add in and subtract and so on and so on. So that's kind of like where we are in the history of philosophy. It's like I will select this, I won't select that, and so on and so on. I hate that approach. I really do, because it's so frustrating, and I think it's wrong. And it also, I'm that's the way I was educated. But even in like my graduate metaphysics course, this is the way I was educated. The guy was like, "Yeah, this is lunchbox ontology. I don't care. Like, I'm going to accept this because certain things are right, certain things are other, and some people just don't have the wrong. They just have the wrong system." So, but now to the point of like, now I'm a Catholic. I've converted, and I'm a Thomist. And I'm like, okay, somebody who's smarter than me figured this out, and beautiful system, big, beautiful system, right? Not to actually, it's funny. Hold on. You guys might appreciate this. I think it's still, yeah, it's still. Hold on. I hate Trump. I don't like him at all. I didn't vote for him, never voted for him, but make Aquinas great again.
Well,
I
have some things I can say about that are interesting.
But anyway, so I'll let you say that in a sec. But
yeah, there was...
now with Thomism, like, you might agree, you might disagree with some things, but at least you have a base that was really rigorously worked out. And then it's brilliant, and he's borrowing and he's synthesizing all these people before us, and I don't think that we're likely to see something like that in history soon. But we really could use something like that, I think. So in the meantime, it's just like, work with what you got. I don't know what your thoughts on this, but now I'm to the point of like, that's my base. I have a reference point. It's not just a matter of faith, but it's like I can also kind of work with this system, corrections and modifications and so on. But like, I'm not straying too far from that, if that makes sense. And that, for me, I don't have the worry anymore, to be honest with you, of like, what should I choose? I go and reference, and then if it's something that's central, obviously it's more worrying. But if it's something that's, on the exterior, I'm just like, whatever. I may not have a view like on the theory of time. I'm just like, whatever, But anyway, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of where I'm at with all this is it's not exclusively these concerns. It's a lot of sort of concerns about pedagogy in philosophy and academic philosophy, how it's practiced, even social explanations for what's being taught, and things like that. And I've kind of reached a point where I'm just quite pessimistic about what metaphysicians are doing in general. I tend to think that a lot of the problems sort of occur as these artifacts of assumptions about the ways that language works, and that if you take slightly different views of language, then the problems sort of reveal themselves as being pseudo problems that dissolve, and then and then you can end up in a position where you're just back where you started, but maybe you feel like things are a little bit where you started before you were doing philosophy, but you feel a little bit clearer about why you're not puzzled by some of the things that might have motivated philosophy in the first place. I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff, but the practical question that I had then was, so in the position that I'm in, like I've been thinking about like going to an RCIA course locally, right? But obviously I feel it would be relatively unfair or weird to sort of like turn up and, you don't know, there's just going to be a bunch of people there, and you've got some poor guy who's like, here's Aquinas' 5 ways, and I've got all of this stuff in my mind philosophically, and I'm not looking to I'm not looking to have some debate with someone or something,
right.
But also I feel that it would be almost like relatively just inappropriate to have some like kind of cursory, there just might be some people who are just thinking about this, and then I'm going to be, if I want to bring up things that are in my mind, they're going to be all these esoteric and bizarre objections and thoughts, and I just don't know, like, do you think that it's appropriate for me to still go through that, and I should just try and like shut up if they mention like natural theology and think about other things, or what are your thoughts on that for someone who's in my sort of
I mean, yeah. Oh, I didn't know this about you considering going to RCIA? I mean, and just to let everybody know, you can go through RCIA and just not join. I know 2 people who went through it 3 times. And I think both are still not in the church. So, but it's like an initiation program into the church, not like a cult and like initiation program, but the idea of like you get taught this catechism, and you get to learn about like what the church believes and so on. I will say this, having been through it just once, not even hitting all the things. Like I was fortunate because I went through my RCIA right by Baylor University. And so it's a Baptist school. It's where I did my doctorate, but we had a bunch, like half the philosophy department, half the faculty and half the grad students were Catholic already. And so I was kind of stepping into that hornet's nest, I suppose. But that's where I converted. I was already working on these things for about 10 years or so. And, but just having people I could bounce off of, it was like the perfect scenario to be like, okay, if I have a question, I'm going to go ask this. And many of those people, grad students and professors, like did special guest, appearances and would teach a class, if it were like their specialty on like sexual ethics or whatever it may be. So, that was like tremendously helpful. And then I'm also a little bit, I'm a little bit, I'm blessed in this way as well now to be at a parish where the Dominicans run it. Of course, that's the OP, Order of Preachers, Dominicans, not Dominican Republic for anybody, but the order of priests and friars who were the same order that St. Dominic and St. Thomas Aquinas, who is relevant here. So those guys are scary smart, and they're able to answer like any question I might have, and so that's really consoling for me. So. I think it depends on where you go, and then like who's running the class. So if it is just somebody who's like a college age intern, and you're like this is like really unfortunate and frustrating that I cannot talk to anybody about this, you're gonna have to like hold bite your tongue and not hold it in, and then ask somebody later. But even I think
just to say on this, sorry, because I can see as well. It's not that I think, oh, well, if they can't answer it, that means it's wrong. Because
right.
Why would some random person even be able to just address? Like it's not, I've been thinking about this stuff for a while. Like so it's like coming along to a gunfight and the other person's unarmed. So like it's just why it wouldn't prove anything to do that, right? It just
exactly
yeah.
One person's inability who wasn't even there to begin with. Like even me, like I think me doing this on YouTube. They misunderstand the context of this and like what is being done. Like when I get on camera and I talk about stuff, I should say this more often, but people need to be reminded that I'm not like the end all be all explanation of everything. And if my explanation fails, then that means the whole system fails and that Christianity is wrong, Catholicism is fake, and like God doesn't exist. It's like, God can do, like, he can do without me. He doesn't need me, So, and there are a lot smarter people out there than I am. Like, I'm just, like, I've put it into my my bio now. If you click on the more on my channel page, I put a quote by Saint Bernadette Subaru, and she says, my job is not to convince. My job is to inform, not to convince. So, like, that's all I'm here for. But yeah, just knowing. Yeah, it could be frustrating, but I think even if, given the context, even if you had some really smart dude there, and if you knew it would derail the conversation, if you asked yeah, it would make you. Some people do this; they don't have any social tact. They're just like they want to look really smart in a situation. I used to be like this, so obviously, just think of the situation and know when it's right to raise these things. And at the end of the day, it's like, is this a question that is, relevant to, in this case, to the next step of becoming Catholic? If it is, then absolutely get it answered. If it's not, like, I went through RCIA and I didn't have all my questions about Catholicism answered. I think this is instructive for not just Catholicism, but just like philosophy in general. Like I didn't have all my questions. Like I became Catholic and I wasn't really 100% sure about like the role of Mary, and like I'm still learning about that stuff. But it's like I think people get it they get it in their head too much that they should have everything 100% nailed down before they get on to the next step or call themselves a certain thing. Like, yes, I'm a moral realist. I know everything that entails and like how to defend it and everything. I don't know, but I don't have to know everything about it. Like that's where I'm drawn, and I'm kind of, I could be talked out of it, I suppose. You see what I mean? Like But anyway, but just some thoughts there. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's interesting to me. Because it just is a concern I have because I've not gone through RCIA at all, and like
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's that wanting to balance, but not wanting to like basically just be like an asshole to people. It's like
Right. Yeah.
I want to be able to have conversations where I can express things that where I'm like, I'm not sure what I think about this, or is this a dogma, or is this like you can kind of
Right.
be, there's certain questions like that I might have, but then I don't want to just make it like the some guy who knows a bunch of philosophy here to
Yeah.
debate bro or something like that as well. And
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
what your thoughts are on whether it's even that's the right context, or you think maybe it'd be better to just like talk to a priest in private or something. I don't.
Absolutely 100% recommend talking to a priest. These guys are hell smart. I've had the privilege of teaching some of them philosophy. They just in a standard, let's say, what's it called? Diocesan priest, which is somebody who just belongs to like the regional diocese, not an order like the Benedictines, Franciscans, or Jesuits or somebody. Like you get some of those guys in those orders and they're hecka smart because Jesuits, Dominicans, they're like know their philosophy. So go to them if you don't have anybody else. Like go to them, that'd be great. But even the diocesan guys, that the ones I've taught, they get 2 full years of nothing but philosophy, and then they get 4 years of nothing but theology, and then they do their like internships. And this is on top of already having a graduate, or sorry, having an undergraduate university degree. So yeah, highly recommend that. But in terms of like raising it in a group setting with people who are just kind of just there to learn about Catholic stuff, I mean, it depends on what it is. Like, if your question is something like, is this a dogma of the church? Absolutely ask that. Like, that's something everybody should know and would benefit from knowing. But if it's something that's like, but this makes you a better thinker and better communicator as well. Because you have to like think like, okay, is this going to affect? You have to know your audience. So that's what I recommend. Just know your audience, and if it's something that's going to benefit them, then yeah, absolutely ask it.
Awesome.
And then also makes you a better communicator, because if it's something that you're not sure about, somewhere in between, like break it down to like explain it like I'm 5, like an 8th grader or something. Like if they can understand it, then I've done well. And that's a challenge. It's not easy to break these things down into basic stuff, but yeah, that's what that, yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. That sort of maybe removes one worry that's in my mind for sort of like going along to one of these things and attending it or whatever. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, you mentioned something, not to drag on this conversation, but you mentioned something earlier about collapsing problems into linguistic problems, ontological problems into linguistic problems. Is this from Rorty? Because I know one of my commenters is like really fascinated with Rorty, and I don't know him enough to like know anything about that, but like that seems to avoid the issue for me.
I am a big Rorty fan. I'd say I take more influence from Wittgenstein personally, but I think Rorty is also influenced by Wittgenstein and thinking in a similar way. The sort of idea, that I think that one of the key problems is, or one of the key, what I should say, differences between different philosophical views would be whether or not language represents reality or pictures it. And I think that a lot of problems are generated by people having sort of picture views of or representational views of language, where semantic meanings are these sort of like units of language that combine in certain ways, and in complexes they correspond to the world. And I think that a whole host of philosophical problems are generated from these things that sort of they kind of just go away if you take a different view of meaning, where Rorty's like mirror of nature metaphor is the idea that what we're trying to do in our theorizing or in our language is sort of like picture the way nature is as accurately as possible. But if language isn't doing this mirroring thing, well, then we're just kind of like caught in a false metaphor that, of course, doesn't lead anywhere. Try to get more and more clear about that. And the views of semantics that I view sort of reduce linguistic meaning more to pragmatics, thinking of meaning as use.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of these more, traditional substantive problems of philosophy about giving analyses of terms like good or truth or
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, they really just become more descriptive tasks of seeing the ways that people do in fact use words and laying out all of those different ways that they can be used and getting clear about the differences and
Yeah.
figuring out what's a legitimate or an illegitimate question to ask. Or so like one good example of this, just to um, to give something off the top of my head, there's an example that Wittgenstein gives of, a philosophical problem being like a student who's studying Latin and he sort of racks his head over whether to sleep is, dormir is like, whether it's active or passive, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's an active verb, but it's a
Yeah.
passive action, and so
Right.
he's sort of like caught between these two uses
Yeah.
of the word, and he's like trying to see, well, what's the truth of it? And a lot of these philosophical problems are kind of not that's not the entire story, but a lot of them are kind of like that, where there's kind of a couple of ways you could go with something, and you're caught in between these two different uses of language.
Yeah. Have you? Yeah. So I'm just becoming familiar with this. My philosophy language background, I really dig it, but I don't know. Like, I mean, I know Wittgenstein. I heard of Rorty. Only read descriptions of his work. Haven't read it deeply. It doesn't really appeal to me. But I've been raised on people like Frege um, and Kripke, and then just getting clarity. Like, have you read much of Aquinas on like every point? He's just like, oh, this could be said in two ways, and I think distinctions are always helpful. But I'm not.
Yeah,
I guess I don't. Sorry, but I guess I don't feel the intuitive pull of the example. I love the example that you gave, but I just don't feel the intuitive pull because that could just be
oh yeah, I
described in
don't
terms
think
of,
that.
oh, well, it means in action to be passive, but in
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Lexically, it means passive or active or something. Yeah.
in terms of how I interpret Wittgenstein,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think what he's doing is incredibly bizarre, and I definitely go with a reading that's sort of like, that he views what he's offering is almost like a kind of therapy, which I've actually seen described quite violently as almost like an exorcism with respect to philosophy, which obviously I understand for. Well, Wittgenstein had a Catholic burial, interestingly, but that's another thing. But
Mm. Wait,
you
would you
know,
you said it was kind of whatism?
an
And
exorcism, which, but not in
okay,
a theological sense. I think he means that
okay,
as like an evocative metaphor. But the idea
got you.
being
Okay,
that
got you. Okay,
people have become so people with these philosophical problems have become so sort of like inculcated with these ways
yeah,
of thinking that they need to be led through a series of exercises through sort of
yeah,
like, you know figuring their way out, leading the fly out of the bottle being the metaphor. And I
yeah.
do think something like that is right, but
I wonder what
so
their
I don't.
aim is, because sorry, I wonder what their aim is, what their target is, because I can see the appeal of applying this from their perspective to apply it to the language used to morality, and then you get something like emotivism or something. But and then of course, like if you want to apply it to theories of truth, you get something like pragmatism or constructivism or something. But other than that, I'm not sure what the appeal of it. I mean, just generally with the pragmatism and so. But other than that, I'm not sure like what the motivation would be to try to just eliminate all ontological metaphysical problems with just like, it's just a language game or something.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't. I get quite frustrated when people who claim to be Wittgensteinians do that sort of thing, where they say, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's just language games," because I do think that's like a mischaracterization of what I take Wittgenstein to be trying to
Yeah.
do. And I do think it's relatively sort of like hand wavy and uninformative,
Yeah.
whatever.
Because I
Um,
think, sorry, I think meaning is use, but it's not only use. I think meaning is maybe largely use or sometimes use, and I'm totally okay with that thesis. But like to say that it's only use, that's where I'm going to break with you. Are you familiar with the study? There's multiple studies, but the one that's most well known is the Buba Kiki effect.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like it's like universal Buba. I'll put it in the chat. Buba Kiki. Actually,
Yeah,
I'll just put the thing. But yeah, that seems to be something um, that's yeah, I'll put it there. That's
it's,
repeatable and it's
Yeah.
universalizable. It's noticed universally, and so that's why I would like pump the brakes and be like, it's not entirely use, but I can
Just
see the appeal of language
just
changing with use. Yeah.
just to say about the Bubakiki effect, I
Mm-hmm.
think one issue with that is that even though it's a pretty much universal effect of the way that humans attribute sounds to shapes,
Yeah.
I think that the problem is that that can't distinguish between um, different views of meaning, particularly with respect to representational semantics or
Right.
non-representational, right? So,
Yeah.
so what I mean by this is that, you know, if you take something like a representational view of semantics, the idea is not just that the language is the word that is used to do a
Mm-hmm.
particular thing, but that the meaning is, you know, as you said, you're into Frege, the sort of like, you know, the mental thing that is grasped in some way, you know. So if it's a true fact sentence, it's going to be a proposition, or if it's a component, you know, Frege's compositionality thing, it's going to be, you know, a noun or a verb or whatever. And that those things are sort of like those components of language, you know, for example, will have certain metaphysical properties like intentionality or whatever. That, you know, there's a mind world fit. They're about the world and so forth. And these things are needed for a semantic theory to work in that sense. The problem is that the Bubakiki effect is actually consistent with both interpretations of meaning
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't distinguish between them, because it could be the case that the reason why we attribute those things in those ways is because in terms of functional operation, in terms of pragmatic use, the smoothness of a curve is similar to the smoothness of the sound versus the sharp sound, and so it's more practically easy and useful for
Yeah.
organisms like us to just operate in that way in the presence of a visual stimuli that's like that. But similarly, it could be the case that we use words like that because there is like a phenomenal representation in the visual system, and there is like, you know, and that is sort of like a proposition or an aspect of a proposition, and when that is expressed in language, that kind of like maps outwards in that way, you know, like it would be consistent with both theories.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. They would be consistent with both. Yeah. Um, yeah. I hadn't thought much about this, but I bring it up to like, I think that, yeah, the meaning of use, like, it doesn't, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Not to get too far afield here, but yeah. Well,
Yes.
but so to get back to how you found me, and I want to jump in here, have Cameron's back on, so, and before we run out of time, but did you, was it on TikTok? Because I'm on TikTok and I'm also on here, so I posted a bunch of things. But are you like big? Because like somebody in the chat was like, "Oh, it's Nathan." It seems like Cameron might know you. So are you like present online? Are you producing?
I do have a YouTube channel. It's not particularly big, but yeah, I've got a YouTube channel where I do some philosophy and some religion and apologetics and psychology and political stuff. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, I'll have to go look you up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely come back, because I know that. Yeah, I guess we'll wrap up there with you. But I've really enjoyed talking with you. So definitely please come back and we'll talk some more. I'd like to get into like more, just like, I know we talked about procedure, we talked about RCIA and all these practical issues, but like to get into the theoretical stuff as well, I'd love to like pick your brain about some things. So I'm always consistently learning things as well. So. Yeah.
Likewise too, and just one last point as well, because you mentioned Aquinas, is that I've been really interested in. I think there are some, like, I'm not saying this is the majority position at all, but some Thomists who are in this line of thought. I first came across this when I read Frederick Coppelstone's like a popular book on Aquinas that he wrote, where he talks about at the start. Yeah, and he talks in the intro about Aquinas's interest in sort of like adhering to common sense uses of language and ordinary use of language. And I was thinking, this sounds very Wittgensteinian to me. And I came across this guy who is a Dominican, Herbert McCabe, who was apparently a Wittgensteinian Thomist.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I've been meaning to look a little bit into that, and then there's Elizabeth Anscombe, who was a Catholic and was one of Wittgenstein's
That's
students,
true.
who
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
a bunch of interesting stuff. So I have been meaning to sort of see if there's
Yeah.
maybe some Thomistic views that sort of marry together some of the stuff I find convincing or
And
interesting.
that, of course, makes me think. You mentioned Anscombe, makes me think of Edith Stein, who was a student of Husserl. Do you know Edith Stein?
Ah,
She's a
no,
saint in Catholic Church. She's a saint in Catholic
okay.
Church. She was killed at Auschwitz because she was Jewish, but she converted, and now she's like considered one of the patron saints of all of Europe, which is pretty amazing. But yeah, she was a student of Husserl. But that's neither here nor there. But with respect to Aquinas, I looked this up, and the question, to go back to what we first were talking about with respect to God's omnipotence and possibility and so on, I'll put it in the chat here. The question is in the Summa Prima Pars, I think question 25 on God's power, and then article 3 and 4 are of relevance. Yeah, so God's omnipotence is article 3. Article 4 is, can God bring it about that past things have never existed? So you get with respect to metaphysical impossibility there. And then logical impossibility with respect to article 3 on God's omnipotence. So there, and he distinguishes, to your point about language and distinctions and so on, he distinguishes in the body. He says, in the first sense, possible is said with respect to this. In the second sense, there's possible in this other sense. So it might be helpful just to go track that. I know it helped me. I found it just like a week or two ago. I probably should have already known about it, but yeah, it was very helpful when I found it.
Yeah, I'll give it a read. I'll see what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I hope to see you next time, please. So,
Likewise. Awesome.
all right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks.
See ya. Bye.
You too.
All right. Cool. So that was a pleasure. So we have just about 30 minutes here, so I'm going to bring back in Cameron, and it looks like he's gonna beat me back to a pulp again. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I really enjoy talking to you. I don't mean that in any way to be disrespectful at all, because and even the other commenters I've noticed, they were like, yeah, he was really smart. I don't know if I should call in or something, but I have a lot to learn from you. So was there anything in that last conversation that like piqued your interest that you want to hop and piggyback on, or was there something else that you thought through and came back?
This is not going to be like a debate thing. This is like
Okay,
genuine
sure.
questions I have personally.
Yeah, of course.
Because I think I've been a fan of Nathan for quite a while. So that was a bit of a
Do you know him
surprise
personally, or
yesterday
did
to
you
go.
just see him? Do you just see him online?
I have messaged him on Instagram a few times, and
Okay,
we've had
cool.
some small conversations. But I don't think he knows this person here is that person there. But
Got you. Yeah.
I think I'm in a similar position with Nathan, because I was quite atheistic in my
Mhm.
philosophy before, and I'm trying to come to faith. It was around Christmas time that I was reading the Bible and started praying, and then I have a friend who's Catholic, and she introduced me to her church, and all of those things, which is very nice. And I've started going to mass. Actually, my priest is leaving soon, and I've started to make him a rosary just as
Wow,
a
that's
thank you,
amazing.
because he's a really nice guy. But my issues, I think, generally are with belief. So I'm trying to believe in God. I'm not sure whether I do or not. I pray, I do whatever. I go to mass. But one question would be, how do I know if I believe in God? And the second question would be, like, do I actually believe anything? Because I'm getting to a point where I don't really hold beliefs at this point. I mean, maybe I see sort of
Yeah.
appeals of things as arguments, but I don't feel in my heart attached to anything, and that applies. Well, I want to join RCIA when I go to university. I want to convert. I want to get confirmed, but do I really believe, and how do I know that, and how do I sort of navigate that? Those are sort of issues I would have.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up, because I know. I mean, today it's such a hostile atmosphere in public, and then even online. Like you just meet people who are just like so belligerent when you raise any issues of faith whatsoever. And so props to you, and then props to Nathan as well for bringing this up. So. With respect to belief, it's like if it's just a philosophical. I'll talk about this from like a philosophical perspective, and then from like a sort of counsel perspective. So, philosophically speaking, we've talked about this in a comment before with respect to like if you believe, does that mean that you have to like let's say affirm the reality, the ontological reality of propositions or something like that, and you're not really sure what that means about with respect to what what it means to hold a belief. I think that's like all residual stuff. And there, so I just take belief to be, I hold it to be the case that, and that's just like the proposition. Whatever you want to say about the ontological status of propositions, who cares whether they're nominal or real? But I take it to, if I hold a propositional belief, I believe that the sun exists. Let's say the sun rises or something like that. Well, I hold it to be the case that the sun rises. That's it. I hold it to be the case. And if that matches reality, it corresponds to reality. I hold a correspondence theory of truth. If it corresponds to reality, that means the belief I hold is true. So I hold a true belief. And of course, you need justification to get knowledge. So yeah, that's the analysis. But other people will, or even I do this, like you can incorporate elements of confidence as well. Or some people will use the word certainty, but I think that's a little bit misleading because I take certainty, certain levels of credence. Yeah. And then you're thinking like a Bayesian with respect to like, what's your credence level? Is it like above 50? Is it 50.001? Then you believe. And if it's below that, you don't. I think that's helpful. And if you're of that more mathematical mind, then go for it. I haven't really thought about that since grad school though. I mean, some people, when it comes to me, for me practically, it's just like, I mean, I'll use it when I use it, but I just don't operate like that, I suppose. I was just watching a Jordan Peterson video today where he was like surrounded by all those atheists. I saw a clip of it, and he was taking issue.
Danny was there, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was there. Yeah. And had the viral moment of the whole thing. And it was somebody else he was talking to. For some reason, Jordan, as a psychologist, was taking issue with the what it means to believe something. He was understanding it, as many people do, and understandably, as a psychologist, he was taking it believe to mean that not just that you hold it to be true, but that you would die for it. It's like, but that's like really meaning infused, and I understand why he would. And so like. So some people see belief as that way. It's just going to be a religious belief. But out of those options, like what of those options looks like something that you kind of gravitate towards the most?
So I recognise there is a distinction between a sort of philosophical conception of belief and a non-philosophical one. So I got bored in college one day, so I was trying to figure out what belief is, and I was really trying to go through what belief was, to try and figure out whether I believe something. But there was, hang on, I'll get it a second. I'll keep on talking, but I'll just turn my camera off quickly so I can grab it. My priest, he gave me a little booklet, which was well, not a booklet, it was an actual book concerned with what belief is, and there was something in it which I might be able to find it, but found it. Here it is. I found it really helpful in a sense. So I was fixated. It's this book, by the way. I don't know if that might be reversed, but it's A Path to a New Life.
Tomislav, I'm not even familiar with the author. That's interesting though.
Neither.
There's some great work being done by Slavic authors in philosophy and theology that like people in the West just mostly don't know. And you'll happen upon them every once in a while, and you'll be like, "This is really good. Why don't we know about this?" So yeah.
And it's sort of spoken there about belief is of the heart, and there's this. I'm sort of focusing a lot on, philosophically maybe beliefs are propositional attitudes, but I don't believe in propositions. So how does that work? But there's the idea that the belief is of the heart, and it's something you deep down take to be true, or something along those lines. You deep down have some sort of relation to. Or have a lost connection?
Yeah, your camera just turned off for a little bit.
Am I still here though? Can you?
Yeah, you are still here.
Okay.
There you are.
It's something you sort of have a deep connection to deep down, but I still feel like so you give the example of the sun rising. Okay, you can tell me the sun is rising, the sun does rise. I can conceive of that, I can think of that, but I don't. It's not like deep down I don't really care about it in some sense.
Right.
I don't have any attachment either way. Maybe the sun does rise. Maybe I can entertain that. I don't feel any attachment to that. And that's the same with all things with me at the minute. So belief in God, I don't feel any attachment either way. Utilitarianism, ideas on free will, I don't have any attachment to any of those. And that's really hard in in
What about things that you
thinking about
do
God.
believe? What does it feel, phenomenologically speaking, to have an attachment to say? I mean, anything of. I think the attachment language only really works when you're talking about something of value, not factual. Um, so let's take it like I believe that I don't know. There's a lot of money in my 401k or something like that. I don't know. I don't even something like that you're attached to. What phenomenologically, what does it feel like to believe that? Where there's something at stake.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. I almost think it's universal, so I don't have
Mm-hmm.
an attachment to anything, which
Okay.
is a bit weird to say, but maybe I just don't believe anything at all, and that would obviously, if I don't believe anything, it'd make it hard to believe. So say I
I
believe in
doubt
God, and then
I doubt that.
convert, and
And I think you do have beliefs of value. I'm just asking you to think of an example, but I think that you have just non-value beliefs. Obviously, you believe that you live in a certain place, you believe that you were born in a certain place, you believe what your name is, these are all beliefs that you hold and they're of no consequence really, but so I don't think it's true that you hold no beliefs, but maybe, and I don't even think it's true that you hold no beliefs of value. I just don't think that you can think of anything off the top of your head, and that's fine. But in any case, sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
then you sort of get the wider problem. Let's say I do have beliefs, and maybe I'm going wrong somewhere. How do I
Mm,
determine what I believe? So a lot of the time, throughout when I was younger, I've been going through arguments for God. One of the earliest books I read was Ed Feser's Five Proofs. Do you know
mm-hmm.
that book?
I'm familiar with it. I've not read it though, but I've grown to have more respect for Ed Feser.
Mm.
Yeah,
That was one of the ones I read, and I've sort of been into that debate on God's existence for quite a while.
yeah,
Um, so that never really worked for me. So I've tried to shift more to a sort of a spiritual way of trying to find God. And I think
yeah.
there was something that do you know Emerson Green?
I
You
don't.
familiar with?
No.
He's a YouTuber. He sort of went from atheism to agnosticism, as far as I'm aware. And
Mm-hmm.
his view was that I can look at the world in a certain way that I can lean towards a view more. So perhaps he can focus more on the suffering of the world and be more like an atheist, or he can look towards the design of the world and be more like a theist.
Yeah,
And that's
that makes
something I
sense.
held, sort of like an indirect doxastic voluntarism. That I can sort of shift my beliefs a bit by what I focus on,
Yeah,
maybe by praying a lot. But I
that's
just
right.
feel like that
Yeah.
maybe that hasn't worked at all deep down. There's just nothing there. Perhaps I've felt no change from atheism to agnosticism to whatever I am
Mm-hmm.
now. I felt no change at all.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
even when I was younger, when I would call myself a theist, I felt no change from being a theist to being an atheist.
So you were you
So
raised theist, and then what would you consider yourself now?
I don't know. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I have no clue at all what my view is, and I don't know how I would even go about figuring out what
Yeah.
my view is, how I could change
And
my view, how I could
that's
become a
totally
theist.
fine, by the way. Like whatever, man. Like if you were to take a snapshot of my life and find me at a place where I didn't know something and that's what matters, that would be in real trouble. So like this is all a progression for everybody. Like you're learning, and that's what matters, and just being open to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's fine if
Okay.
you're at a point where just like I just don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh
Well.
yeah, so you
Well.
say you might go like the more spiritual route or something like that. Like for me personally, I know people have gone this way, and and I don't know if it's just the way I'm constructed or something. I'm not. I mean, I do. I think I'm a well-rounded individual, and that I have a vibrant emotional life, and sympathy and so on. I can cry during movies that are really touching and sensitive, and during certain spots. But I just reflecting upon it, and maybe I'm revisionist about some things, but reflecting upon it, I don't really recall it being the emotional or spiritual path, or even the sense of belonging path for me. It was more the intellectual path. And I think the initial trouble for me was like, at least it was seen that it was initially okay, intellectually speaking. First of all, to have doubts, and then second of all, to realize, okay, there might be some things that I don't fully understand, but there are smarter people than me who've worked it out, and then to kind of finding, if at rock bottom I'm still really unsatisfied, then okay, continue to pursue it. But if I get to a point where I'm like, I've worked on this problem and I at least at the point don't feel the tension or that I once felt, I maybe don't have it intellectually resolved or something. So that was for me like there was more of an intellectual route, at getting past that point of like, this is I need to find the initial point, like this initially okay to like believe in God. I was raised religious, but then I went to like an atheistic period throughout college, and that was a problem of like real doubt, and that's what got me more interested in epistemology and philosophy and so on. But yeah, but you're suggesting maybe the spiritual route, and this reminds me honestly of Pascal's wager. Did you watch the video that I did on that? And yeah, where he says that
I
idea
think
is,
so. Yeah.
yeah, he gets to this point of he's past the wager in that passage. If you want to look the passage up, given that they're fragments, they're not all uniformly numbered, so it depends on what edition you have. There's not a specific number, but it's usually marked. It's a famous wager passage. Near the end of that passage, he says, okay, I've taken the wager. He has a hypothetical objector who's like, well, I've taken the wager, and I know that I should believe in God, but I can't. So what do I do? And his recommendation is very similar to what you're saying, that you're kind of walking through the steps of like, I'm just going to go through the steps. And for a lot of people, that sounds like faking it, and it seems really inauthentic. But that's exactly what you're describing also in the indirect doxastic voluntarism. Like, that's the way we change our beliefs about anything. If I'm convinced about something, but I can't, like at a second order level, and I can't really convince my first order self about this, then I put myself in a position to change those first order beliefs. And that's what he recommends. Yeah.
But I guess the issue I'm facing is that I've tried that. That's the view I had before. I
Mm.
held. I think Alex O'Connor said a similar thing as well
Mhm.
when he talked about divine hiddenness. But you know, you can try and go to church, you can try and do all these things to change your beliefs at a different level. But for me, that just has not worked so far. I don't think it has. Maybe it has. Maybe I do deep down believe in God or something. But if I want to become Catholic and I truly want to convert, do I honestly believe in God? And if I don't, am I being deceitful in some sense? Am
Mm.
I? Yeah, I think there's issues there. I don't really know how to navigate such an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the beauty of the Catholic faith, is that although it's very universal, obviously, and then right there in the name Catholic means universal, but it's also very deeply personal. So like, you know, you're taking this vow personally, and it's only you can do it, following your conscience. And so I can't tell you, you know, well, you've got to reach this threshold. I mean, that's completely going to be whatever it is for you. Um, yeah. So I mean, I'm not in your mind. I don't know if deep down you really believe in God or not, but like I can tell you, like, if like you are now, if you give me like certain like this and this, I can be like, okay, if I were in that situation, I would maybe proceed in a certain way this way, or if similar situation this way and that way and so on. So here are my options. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's going to be not to say that it's subjective, of course. So you're not hearing it this way, but anybody in the audience might be hearing this. You know, oh, it's all at the end of the day, it's just whatever you think. It's not that, of course. It's that you have to make the decision, you know, and be confident about what you're doing, of course. And of course, you don't have to have it all figured out. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't have a lot of things figured out. I'm still working through like Mariology, views on Mary. I'm working out stuff on the real presence in the Eucharist, like how the bread and wine changed to the body and blood of Christ. It's like foreign to me because I was raised Southern Baptist. So like that doesn't make any sense to me at all, especially when I first joined. But I knew that like there was enough there, a critical mass. I was at a threshold point where I was like, okay, this needs to happen. And for me, it took like 10 years. For some people, it takes. I have a friend who recently became Catholic, and we've gotten a friendship over YouTube, believe it or not. He lives in Maryland, so I went and like saw him. And for him, it took 20 years of God just like, all right, you know, just working through these issues. And but yeah, so but so you say you're at a point where you've tried these things and they may not be working. So a couple thoughts about that. It's, well, excuse me, first of all, how long should you wait? You know, who knows, man? I don't know. You know, if thinking about, I mean, again, this is a lifelong pursuit of the truth. So there really is no time limit on how long you should wait and to feel God's presence. Like me, having not gone the spiritual route, I rarely have ever feel God's presence, and I may never have, to be honest with you. Like, it's a really rare thing in my life. I don't know, you know, if I've ever had a religious experience at all. It would be nice, but you know, who knows? Yeah. So anyway, I just lost my train of thought there, but Yeah, but how long should you pursue it? It's really, I think you should, as long as you're thinking about it, just keep thinking about it. I mean, there's really no end to it. And oh, here's the other thing I said. So it reminds me of Mother Teresa. She had already grown up in a Catholic home, and she had already felt a deep sense of the presence of Christ, probably more than I have. Her path was different, of course. And most people don't know this, but I'm connected with the Mother Teresa Institute, so I know it. That most people don't know that through the last 50 years of her life, maybe 60 years of her life, she lived to be 90, 80 something. She had this really deep spiritual desolateness, this spiritual darkness that she like did not feel the presence of God. And like if you look at some of her writings, it's like, is heaven real? What am I doing? You know, like it's really deep and like jarring, especially because on the outside she has this like glowing presence about her. So even in cases like that, I mean, you can move forward. And of course, her path is different because she started in a different place than you. But she moved forward even though she didn't feel the presence. But anyway, that's just one other thing that made me think of. But anyway, thoughts here.
Yeah, there was something interesting. So maybe in some way Christ has presented himself to me. I'm not too sure. I remember the first time I went to mass, and there were a few interesting things you could say that happened. And these could all be explained naturally, of course, but so one thing that stuck out was I was looking at the statue of Mary they have in the corner of the church,
Mm-hmm.
and my glasses weren't on, so
Mm-hmm.
this could have just been the trick of my eyes, but it
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
looked like the face of Mary was animated. Now
Mm-hmm.
that isn't the crazy part because that could be explained by natural phenomena. But a few minutes later, the priest started talking about looking at the statue of Mary and as if Mary's
Mm-hmm.
face was alive, and that was a bit weird to me.
Yeah.
And then I guess another thing was on that day I was feeling a bit down about my grandfather. I don't often too much. Because he
Mm-hmm.
passed away a few years ago. And then
Yeah.
the day of that mass, the priest was talking about praying for the loved ones that were deceased. So that's another interesting thing. And then
Yeah.
the third thing was about this book. I was working through ideas of belief a few weeks prior, and the first time I come to mass, the priest gives me a book that
Mm.
solves, in some sense, the issues that I was trying to figure out. So it's those weird, maybe they're just coincidences, but that's three coincidences.
It's true.
My first time going to mass. Maybe that was in some way a sign, but even then, my heart still felt cold to it. I didn't feel moved by it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel anything about it. So even then, maybe Christ would present himself. Maybe I just don't feel anything.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. Coincidences, if you have enough of them, it makes you stop to think about whether they're coincidences or not. You're right. Have you ever gone to adoration?
Yes, yeah, I went
Yeah. What's that like for you?
a few days ago. I don't exactly know what to do there. I've only been
Yeah.
twice,
It's really
but
so
there's a lot of
adoration.
sitting in silence. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So just for those who don't know, adoration is like, Catholics, of course, believe in the real presence, the body and blood of Christ are truly present there in the wafer and the host. And so going to adoration, there's not a mass being held. There's no ceremony. It's just, it's along those lines, like holy hours like this. It's like, Jesus tells his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was upset. He's like, you couldn't even wait with me for an hour, and so the idea is there to just be present and just like pray. Who knows? Maybe not. Just sit there and receive. And that's, especially in such a fast paced world with all these digital screens and everything, that's so difficult. But I mention it because you had said, is Jesus, does he appear to me? And of course, Catholics believe that he does appear. He's truly present in the Eucharist. And so, yeah, what was that like for you when you went to adoration? I
The
know it's
first
it's
time I went,
weird because yeah, it's weird because you're like, what am I doing here? It's this weird
mm,
thing. It's beautiful, sure, but like, what am I looking at? What do I do? Yeah, but anyway, sorry, go ahead.
the first time I went, I was with my friend who introduced me to the church, and that was the time that the priest gave me this book. So it was on the same day as I went. The first time I went
Mm-hmm.
to mass. But the second time, which was this or last Sunday, I think,
Mm-hmm.
I was with a friend, and um we prayed a rosary beforehand, and then I prayed a rosary by myself. And I was really hoping for some sort of Eucharistic miracle, because I thought that would be interesting. Maybe that would
It would solve a lot
clear
of
everything up.
problems, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. Nothing happened, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
it was really nice to be there and just pray a rosary in sort of in peace and in calmness, and that was really nice. But
Yeah.
beyond that, I didn't feel much. It wasn't. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I got a buddy who's not even Catholic, and he's very contemplative and follows the tradition of the church in this way, much better than I am. And he's a fellow philosopher as well, Brandon Rickabaugh. And really great guy. Does stuff on consciousness and the soul and everything. It's a really wonderful stuff, like a lot smarter than I am on that stuff. But he, yeah, his advice, man, if you were to ask him, is things like just sit in the mud, man. Like just sit in the weeds and just be there. Like it's so hard to just sit there, not only just to be still, but to like realize that here's God, creator of all the universe. You know, let's just go with that, and then to realize something about myself too. I'm also realizing that my mind is wandering, obviously, that I don't really want to be there, and I'm confused about why I am there. But once I quiet that, I might get to the point of like, it's uncomfortable, because if that's God and I'm here, I'm a sinner. And so that's what I mean about sitting in the weeds. It's like just to accept that, and to accept that him coming and him dying, him resurrecting is in pursuit of me. And that's because he loves me. And that is like, that's the truth. That's the heart and the core of Christianity. It's like God loves you so much that even while you're a sinner, to do that all for you. And if you just sit with that, that'll mess you up. Like really, really mess you up. Not in like a cult like, to any skeptics out there or anything like that you're brainwashing yourself, but you're sitting with the idea that a creator God came for you, even when he knows everything. He knows that you're unlovable, but he still loves you. And like those sorts of feelings, at least that's for me going to adoration. There may be things that are on my mind that I want to, like supplications or something I want to present and pray for a certain thing. There may be a live stream or two, a couple weeks back. It's interesting because a couple weeks back I went to adoration right before those debates I did. Weren't really debates, but I had those two atheists, the Godless Engineer and Deconstruction Zone, John and Justin, and they were brutal, man. It was like a lot of spiritual warfare. If you don't think the spirit world is like real like that, do something like that and put yourself out there and just feel the oppression. I couldn't sleep for like a couple of days, and but I prepared for it by going to adoration, and sometimes I'll like go there and just offer something of like, here's a request, and but yeah, it's very different. People go for different reasons. I'm probably not even doing it right, to be honest with you. but yeah, it's just some interesting things to think about. But anyway, more generally speaking, excuse me. So you're at the point that you're really not sure if God exists, but you're going through these steps anyway. Are you like, surely you're hopeful, but do you feel bad about being hopeful? Like, what's your position on that? What's your perspective? Is it like, oh, this is like futility and I'm being ridiculous about this? Or like, do you think it's a reasonable hopefulness, or what do you think?
What do you mean, hopefulness? Hopefulness for
That you
like
hope
that there
that
is
you
a
can
God?
believe that God exists. You hope that God exists. It's
Oh,
interesting because I do ask people this. I think it's a fair question to ask. It's like, if God exists, would you want it to be true that God exists? Would you want him to exist? I think you're on the right path there. So, like, it seems like you would want it to be true if God does exist. So are you hopeful that he does exist? Are you hopeful that you will believe that he exists and that he'll appear? Those sorts of thoughts. Are those what's like swirling around in your mind, or are other things swirling around?
maybe I'm not so hopeful that God exists, because that whole idea of God existing or not existing to me is just I'm completely have
Hmm.
no clue about that. But I think I'm hopeful that I can believe and truly accept in my heart that God exists. That's what I'm hopeful for, because I think that the Catholic faith would be really good for me, and it'd be really good for a family that I hope to build at some point.
Yeah.
I see the virtues of that, and I think it's really really nice and really great to have. Um, so I guess maybe I can put aside the hope that God exists, or whatever, and the hope
Hmm.
that I can come to believe that God exists. That's the main focus for me.
Okay, yeah. So it's not that you are unconcerned about the metaphysics of the situation. It's just that, um, yeah. Because so let me put it this way. So I don't think this is what's happening with you, but sometimes when people say this, I don't concern about whether God exists. I'm only concerned about whether I can believe it. They seem to disregard, like they only see like the functional utility of belief, and they're like, I want that, but I don't care if God exists. I don't think that's what I'm hearing from you. But it's just that what is more concern for you now is that you were concerned that you would hope to believe it.
Yeah. For me, it's not just that
Okay.
I think it's good for me and whatever. I think it is a genuinely really nice thing to believe and to have
Mhm.
and to go to mass and all these things.
I don't think that's
I'd have
inappropriate
to.
either, because you know you know not only do philosophers, the scholastics, the classical philosophers, say that God is truth, God is good, but he's also beauty. And so, being drawn to beauty in these ways, not just the visual appearance of beauty and beautiful churches and faces and so on, and the nice monstrous they put the Eucharist in and all that, but the beauty of having a family, raised a family, having the values that really make sense. I mean, I think C.S. Lewis put it like, I don't, he says something like, it was an indirect proof of God. It's not that I believe that God exists because I see that he exists. It's just that by his light, like everything else makes sense. And so this would be the idea, like these things like are really beautiful in light of what God exists. He bestows his beauty on these things. I'm drawn to those things. And man, just wait till what happens when you see like not just that the things are beautiful, but that God is beautiful. I'm still working on that. It's like, I mean, I think if God were to reveal his utter beauty to us, like we wouldn't be able to, as finite beings, wouldn't be able to withstand it, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I think maybe the solution for me is just to go to mass more and continue attending it because it's a
Yeah.
really nice thing to do. I mean, for me, the church that I go to is quite a while away. It's on the train, it's 20 minutes. On the bus, it's an hour.
Mm.
It's quite a while if I want to get there. But I think maybe that shows that I do want to believe, I do want to come to faith. It is
Yeah.
a really enjoyable thing. I like the community, I like the people. But
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
interesting I have found is that the Catholic people in England are a lot nicer than the Protestant people, which is quite funny. I don't know why that is, but that's just something I've observed that they
Mm.
are really nice people. So yeah,
Yeah. I guess it depends on where you are, but yeah, um, there's obviously a really deep history between Catholics and Protestants in England. uh, yeah, so I think that's fine. I think as far as motivation goes, you want it to be true. As far as like a council perspective here, just my 2 cents. You don't have to take it or whatever, but um, I think it's totally not inappropriate. I think it's completely appropriate and apt that you're pursuing these beautiful things, not just for the utility, but like you're pursuing it because they're beautiful and they can be explained best within the context of these Christian values, Catholic values, and so on that derive from God who is good. Um, and I wouldn't see some. I say this because some people might be like they might feel like that's a improper motivation. They're like, I'm just doing it for what I can get out of it. Man, God, he deals with people who are sinful and twisted and misguided, and and deals with weird motivations all the time. Like he's gonna work it out okay. Like if as long as you're going in that direction, doesn't matter how you get there. Honestly, I for the most
well,
part, yeah.
I'm not saying I'm not saying that is my motivation. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
whether I'm
Of
hopeful or not
course,
that God
yeah.
exists because I have absolutely no idea what my
Right.
views or beliefs are on the actual existence of God. I don't know whether I'm hopeful for it. I don't know whether I believe it, anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. I actually don't know why I go to mass. Maybe there is something deep down that I maybe deep down I do believe in God and that's why I go to mass.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that's the case. I don't know what my motivation is. I don't sort of have a conscious
Mm.
drawing to Catholicism because of those benefits. I think those just are benefits which are quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not exactly that my motivations are pragmatic per
Of course.
se.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You may not
yeah,
even know what
yeah,
your motivations are. That's totally fine, and
yeah,
it's good to
yeah,
self-reflect. But if you don't have
yeah.
to know them, also, I mean, like you may be aware of this, but or maybe not. But there have been, especially among young people, a real draw towards the Catholic Church, and specifically speaking, drawn to Christianity, generally speaking, but especially churches, not just Catholicism, but higher, what's called high liturgy, like the Orthodox Church, even Anglican. I don't know if that's considered high liturgy to you, but it is to me, growing up in like a
Not at all.
congregationalist. Yeah. So growing up in like a place where it's like very democratic, we just vote on whatever the pastor wants to do. Yeah, that's very high liturgy compared to that. But anyway, but yeah, it's a generational thing, and I'd also, just something to flag. Not that this is a concern or if it's happening with you, but I tend to stay away from culture war stuff. And I know that many people probably are drawn for those reasons. They're like, oh, well, look what the culture is offering us in terms of like whatever made like the transing kids and surgery and stuff. It's like, I don't want a part of that. And I realized that, okay, the Catholic Church has an answer, or I really am drawn to whatever it is in there. And if they do it for like culture war stuff, I have some concerns about that. Just something to flag. Not that you're doing that, but anybody who's like moving towards that way, I'd just recommend like maybe check your motivations with that. And I have to think about that too. Like, when I'm doing my work in teaching or on YouTube, I tend to stay away from the culture war stuff, because that stuff's it's just gonna come and go. I just stick to perennial issues, the issues that really matter, like God's existence, moral relativism, that sort of thing. Because like culture war stuff, whatever, man, everybody has an opinion. So I don't know if you've heard that saying. I told this to my wife, and she had heard it for the first time just the other day for me, that opinions are like buttholes. Everyone has one and they all stink.
Yeah.
So it's like that with that stuff. But anyway.
Well, for me, just me personally, I don't really, because I don't think I have any views on anything, which
Mm-hmm.
may be a bit an extreme position, but I don't really have any views on abortion, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
transgenderism. So I wouldn't say I'm involved in the culture in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my own personal views. Yeah, but I think that is an important thing
Good,
to
yeah.
flag up.
And
But as you said about, sorry, what were you saying?
that may derive from either one, just to flag this, being either uninformed because you just hadn't thought about it yet, or two, getting to the point, sort of like a Socratic, just like irony. Like I know that I don't know anything. I'm so informed that like I can't really hold a position on anything. So like two extremes there, but yeah. And I think it's a totally fine position to have. It's like I don't know what to think. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's even them. So I used to be against abortion when I was in my Ben Shapiro phase, when I was
Mm,
13 years old, and then I
yeah.
was fine with it from a utilitarian perspective. But now I genuinely just don't hold
Yeah.
any feeling for any view. I'm just indifferent. Deep down, I'm indifferent to it, I guess. But as you were saying about people coming to the Catholic Church younger, I think that's quite interesting. I think it is because you said it's high church. I think it is a return to traditionalism, to
Mm-hmm.
traditional culture, traditional behavior. Um, yeah, I don't know how much that is in America, but I think it's quite
Mm-hmm.
strong in the UK. People
Yeah.
people want culture, the traditional
Yeah.
culture, and all those things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very strong. It seems an undercurrent though, and I'm not sure if it's really caught on yet, but you do see big movements of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we should probably wrap it up there.
Yeah.
We've gone a little bit over, and I appreciate it, man. This has been so great, and I hope we can do it again. So,
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
last word you want to put in before we hop off here?
No, just a thank you to you because this has
Oh,
been a very
awesome.
nice conversation. I appreciate the help you've given me, which is really nice, and also thank you to Nathan as well for coming on.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely,
but yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, good. I hope to see you
thank you.
next time. Then I'll wrap this up. All right.
Yeah,
All right. So, yeah. So that is it for us today, guys. I really appreciate both both guys coming on, and you guys have been amazing. And hopefully we can continue to do this at least weekly. Like I mentioned, among the very first comments. This is now weekly, but maybe once the school year hits, the semester begins in fall, this can turn into a bi-weekly thing. We shall see. That'd be my goal. That'd be nice, but we shall see. And it's always a call-in show. Anybody's it's possible to call in at any time. Have the link there at the top if you're wondering how to get on. And maybe you didn't join because you're just like not sure what to say, or you're a little shy or whatever, but hopefully I continue to do this enough. You can see that I'm not that bad or scary or something. And again, I'm not just here to just tell everybody that they're wrong or debate or be mean or anything like that. This is a learning experience for you, but it's also a learning experience for me. That's why I'm doing it. So I really, really appreciate y'all being here. And so remember, as Ace Trace, my boy here, is here. He always says to like and subscribe, share, that sort of thing, comment. Do all that once this video posts, and I will see you all next time. All right, take care.